Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. The Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
In the meantime, we continue to track the president over in the Middle East. He is in Doha, Qatar, and he's been making some statements, and there's also been some more business deals coming down. We want to dig into all of this over the next 14 minutes. President Trump, we should point out, he did talk about exploring normalizing relations with Syria after the toppling of longtime autocrat Bashar al-Assad. This is adding to a pledge to lift sanctions against the country's new government. Let's get some context on this, some thoughts on a possible deeper U.S.-Syrian relationship. With us is Bloomberg News senior reporter Jennifer Delohe. She is traveling with the president, and she joins us from Doha at this moment. Jen, good to have you here. A lot of ceremony as we continue to look at the live pictures out of Qatar. And of course, we know that the president, a receiving line, a greeting line, but getting ready to go into a Qatari state dinner. Tell us a little bit about the day's developments, and in particular with Syria. And for those, it's a complicated relationship, and we understand why, but I'm curious about why this moment in time might the president be looking to deepen ties.
I mean, it's a good question, and because it's the moment and the reason of why it happened now is directly related to this trip. In this pivotal moment with Syria actually kind of unfolded this morning while the president was still in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, attending a meeting of the Gulf Cooperation Council. He met with Syria's new president, Ahmed al-Shara, for what was really a remarkable meeting, the first meeting between the heads of the U.S. and Syria since 2000. And the meeting was essentially brokered by and encouraged by Turkey's President Erdogan, as well as Saudi's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who Trump had been, visiting with for essentially 36 hours at that point, or at least a day and a half. It was an extraordinary meeting, really, that came about in this place and in this time. And his decision to pursue normalization with Syria and to lift sanctions on Syria was encouraged by both men.
What do we know, Jen, about Ahmed al-Shara, the country's president who took place of longtime autocrat, as Carol mentioned, Bashar al-Assad? What do we know about him?
Well, I mean, he is a former militant. He joined al-Qaeda in Iraq to fight American troops after the 2003 U.S. invasion. He has spent many years and really since the toppling of the Assad regime, trying to encourage folks to believe he's turned a new leaf. He's a changed man and really arguing to the world that Syria shouldn't pay the price for the Assad era, and that's so he's really extended this olive branch, and that's obviously getting this recognition and this endorsement essentially from Trump is pretty significant. And I will say that the U.S. president did outline things he expects to see from Syria, including signing on to the Abraham Accords with Israel, which is normalization with Israel that the president has been seeking since his first term, and some other changes, really cutting off any support for terrorism or housing of terrorists within Syria, things like that.
Is he a different man, a different individual who was that former militant who joined al-Qaeda? I think since then he has disavowed the terrorist group, but I do wonder, what kind of leader do we know him to possibly be in the future? Is it going to be a different Syria than it was under Bashar al-Assad?
I think that's a very open question, and it's a very real one for Israel, which the backdrop for this trip that Trump is taking in the Middle East, going, of course, to Saudi Arabia, then to Qatar, and tomorrow heading to the United Arab Emirates, is that he's not going to Israel, and certainly relations with Israel have been a little bit tenser in recent days. There's a sense that in Israel they're feeling a little bit of the cold shoulder shoulder from the U.S. right now. And this move with Syria is one that is likely to spark fresh tensions with Israel because they've issued these constant warnings about Shara's government, and they've actually carried out airstrikes in Syria since Assad's ouster. So, there's really a wait and see a piece to all of this that we will in fact have to wait and see how this all plays out. But there's definitely folks questioning this embrace.
Hey, Jen, one thing I always think about is, this is the first planned trip by President Trump overseas, right? We know he went certainly for the Pope's funeral, but this is the first planned trip. And I do wonder the significance. I know this is something Tim and I kind of keep going back to, significance of it being the Middle East, the significance of it being Saudi Arabia, the significance of Qatar, maybe not going to Israel. It's not so far off the map, right, to stop there on the trip. What message does that send to the world about President Trump and his White House and their, global priorities? Or is it different? Because fair to say the Trump administration is a bit of a different one.
It might be a bit of both. I mean, Trump certainly is different, and we shouldn't discount that in this context. He is a president who values investments and deals in the U.S., and this trip is a lot about investments and securing announcements of purchases and commitments to invest in U.S. manufacturing and buy U.S. goods. So that has been a theme throughout the trip and one we will continue to see. So I think that's certainly a factor here. The president is also very clearly saying that he sees the Middle East and U.S. allies in the Middle East as incredibly important for both regions, both on a commercial level and at a security level. And he expressed this very clearly yesterday. He gave a pretty big speech at a Saudi-U.S. investment forum, basically articulating that he wants to see cooperation with the Middle East on commercial matters and other matters, and really cheerleaded essentially any efforts to get away from violence and terrorism. Mm-hmm. And of course, all of this is happening as he is trying to encourage, peace in Gaza and a ceasefire there. Some of the focus on investment, maybe right, because, that progress has been slower to realize than he wants.
All right. So good to be able to check in with you. We know long days there, Jen. So thank you so much. Bloomberg News senior reporter Jen Delohy.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app, or watch us live on YouTube.
I think it's fair to say that there's more news about higher education at any time in our lifetimes. I think Janet Lauren would agree with that. Among the latest headlines, Harvard University said it will free up an extra $250 million of school money to help pay for research during the coming year after the Trump administration scrapped multi-year federal funding of more than $2.6 billion. Also, we learned today that University President Alan Garber will take a voluntary 25% pay cut for the academic year that starts July 1st, a school spokesman said. So that's just Harvard, but it's fair to say schools all over are feeling a pressure. We have with us Dr. Justin Schwartz, Chancellor of the University of Colorado Boulder. He's also an entrepreneur, the founder and CEO of Lupine Materials and Technology, and Eagle Power Technologies, co-founder and CTO. Also with us is Janet Lauren, higher education finance reporter for Bloomberg News. Janet is here in studio. Dr. Schwartz is in Boulder. Dr. Schwartz, I want to start with you, and then we can do a roundtable here. What's the pressure you're feeling from Washington, or are you feeling any pressure from Washington, given what we've heard from the Trump administration and what the Trump administration has done when it comes to grants, funding for schools all over the country?
Sure, great. Thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here with you. I think the number one pressure on us right now is the lingering uncertainty of everything that's going on. I've lost track of how many of the F&A reduction efforts are still pending in the courts for adjudication. Uncertainty around the cancellation of ongoing research grants from all sorts of different agencies is, again, another uncertainty. And then, of course, uncertainty in terms of what will be in next year's budget for all the different research agencies. The uncertainty brings, the anxiety. It brings the concern. We're trying to recruit graduate students for this coming fall. And in many of the disciplines that we get federal funding, particularly the STEM disciplines, graduate students, are usually supported by those research grants. And so trying to make, 1, 2, 3, 4-year commitments to some of the best and brightest people from around the world is challenging when there's, a lack of clarity in terms of what funding situations will be like and what the federal commitment will be to this, 60, 80-year-old partnership between higher ed, the federal government, and industry for advancing our economy.
So as a nuclear engineer, you certainly know your way around the STEM field and have no doubt received your own funding from federal grants. What does this atmosphere feel like as a researcher?
So I think there's two pieces to it as a researcher. One is, as I pointed to, just the uncertainty. But then there's also just that question of, is what I've been doing and committed my life to doing valued, right? Does the public, does the government recognize that, what I'm doing in my research is in part to advance the research topic that I'm working on, but also to educate students who are going to go into the workforce, who are going to go and create new companies, who are going to go and advance technologies and, and drive the society forward. So I think it's a twofold piece, the pragmatic of how does this impact my ability to do the research, but secondly, how is what I do as an enterprise perceived?
It's interesting, Dr. Schwartz, I think about geopolitics and the importance of what many would argue is soft power, right? So whether it's providing aid, but what that does for a country like the United States in terms of being able to really have a front seat at the table on so many different issues. And the same thing for, I think, R&D that gets done at hospitals, gets done at academic institutions, and whether it's with private money or federal money, what that kind of grants us on an innovative, disruptive world. Without it, what's the U.S. at risk of?
So one of the things that I think is not fully appreciated is the role that U.S. higher ed has played through its research enterprise in attracting really the smartest people from around the world to the United States, permanently. And this goes back decades, to the early days of NASA were in part successful, and we took the world leadership over 60 years ago, in part because of the scientists that emigrated to the U.S. after World War II. Our ability to not just compete, but to really dominate in R&D and technology development all these decades is in part because we've not, when you bring in the best and brightest from around the world, you're not only adding the best and brightest to your enterprise, but you're denying your competitors the best and brightest, right? So it's a double win. And so with that, there's also the scientific diplomacy that comes from being a global R&D leader. I think back to I think it was early mid 80s, so it had to be early mid 80s, when Reagan had the summit with the Soviet leader, and one of the lesser announced outcomes was actually a partnership in fusion R&D, and that sort of enterprise, brings together collaborations even with competing nations. So there's so many benefits to being a leader in R&D research at universities, which are more readily open to visitors than industry, that it's difficult to predict what the unintended consequences could be.
So when you were here in New York recently, we were talking about a bill in Congress that would fix the price of college for 4 years, give families certainties. And some other university presidents who are with you were saying, well, that's a difficult challenge because you don't know what our budget is. But your answer was that CU Boulder has been doing this for many years. Could you tell us how that has worked and how this all came about from the state legislature?
So at CU Boulder, it actually started on campus, not with the legislature. We've been doing it since 2016 for all of our undergraduate students, freshmen and transfers. And for in-state students, it also includes tuition and mandatory fees. For out-of-state and international students, it's only tuition, but of course that's the biggest piece. And, I will say in the last few years with, when inflation is higher, it can be a little bit of a challenge for the university. But that challenge is well worth it because, we like to say that we are focusing on our mission first. Of course, we have to balance our budget and make ends meet. But if we can do things that help our students see that they can not only come to Boulder, but graduate from Boulder, then that's critical. And it's even with the risk of inflationary impacts, it really actually makes good business sense. I don't think there's any industry that wouldn't say repeat customers are more valuable than even going for new customers. And for us, that translates to the more we can do to ensure that a student that comes to Boulder stays at Boulder and graduates from Boulder, that really benefits our bottom line financially more than annual tuition increases across the board. So I think it's a great idea. It's the first institution I've been at that has it, and I truly love it. I think it's nice to be able to say to a family, this is what your tuition is going to be this year, next year, the year after, and the year after that. And for them, knowing that, okay, it'll go up if they're here more than 4 years, right? That's actually that extra incentive for the student to say, yeah, maybe I should make sure I get done in that 4-year window.
And this is the same for in-state and out, not the same tuition, but this applies for out-of-state students as well?
International, yes, sir.
The exception would be dual degree recipients, right, who are charged a higher
Correct.
Tuition.
That's right.
And then their tuition is not fixed.
Correct. So if they're doing like a bachelor's, master's, then it's the higher of the rates. The majority of our students get that benefit. What
is the typical 4-year graduation rate in the sense of like, okay, how many people, what portion of students does this apply to versus those who can't finish in 4 years?
Yeah, so our 4-year graduation rate right now is around 60%, just under. Our 6-year graduation is about 74%. So you can see, like, if the group that took 6 years did 4, they'd benefit. 60% puts us well above the national average, but well below where I want to take us as chancellor.
Can I just say we're all kind of looking at each other, and
I'm shocked.
All respect, we're like, that kind of feels kind of low.
I'm surprised.
Like, that's a bit of a bummer. Yeah, and it's not just
so. Yeah. And just for some clarity, if a student comes to CU Boulder, spends a year or two here, and decides, I'd rather go somewhere else for whatever reason, like, I'm from Maryland and I'd rather be close to home, that student may still graduate in 4 years, but it would still count against us in terms of 4-year graduation.
How often does that happen, though? How often does somebody start and go somewhere else?
It's, I don't have the exact number, but it's honestly not that uncommon.
Okay.
And so, in fact, we're working right now to see increases year over year in the number of students that transfer to CU Boulder. So that would mean we'd have students that would graduate here, but wouldn't count for our 4-year graduation rate either because they didn't start here. So the way it's counted is based specifically on is graduating at the exact same campus that you start at.
So is what holds apart from transferring to a different school, what typically holds people back from graduating in 4 years? Is it a lack of ability of courses that will allow them to graduate? Or is it really on the student's end more so than on the university's end?
It's a whole plethora of things. Okay. And to be honest, we're trying to understand. I've only been at Boulder less than a year, and our team is digging in to try to understand why every student who doesn't graduate in 4 or 6 years, what was the reason? So for some of them, right, they may come in, they're really excited, they listen to Bloomberg News, so they want to be a business major, and they get in and they realize, well, maybe I don't want to be a business major, so they transfer to another college, and that costs them a year, right? Or they start out, like our 2 biggest, most excited programs for students, most heavily demanded, are business and engineering. And a student may start in engineering and decide, I'd rather be a math major, or I'd rather do physics. So when they change majors, that can delay their graduation. Some of them will take time off because they need to raise money, right? And so financial can be a deterrent. Those are reasons why you see a 15% increase from the 4-year to the 6-year graduation rate, right? Because a lot of the students just need that extra time to figure out what it is they actually want to do. So one of the many things that we're trying to do to increase the graduation rate is give students more flexibility to find their path without a delay in their academic progress. And just to go back to that transfer number, we graduated about just under 10,000 students this last week at commencement. We get about 2,800. We accept about 2,800 transfer students annually.
Oh, wow.
So that's a big piece. So there's 2,800 students whose some other school is getting a ding in their four-year graduation rate.
Right.
Even though that student is going to come and get a degree and succeed. So that it's one of those lies, damn lies, and statistics situations. That knowing the nuance of it makes a difference.
Absolutely. Good to understand kind of the ebbs and flow, like how it all kind of plays out. We're talking with Dr. Justin Schwartz, Chancellor of the University of Colorado Boulder. Also with us is our own Janet Lauren, higher education finance reporter right here at Bloomberg News.
Well, one thing that I was surprised to find out recently when I did a story about a donation that encouraged students to graduate in 4 years was the national average is only 52%. And we talk about student loans. Yes, I know. Tim
oh my
and Carolyn
God.
Yes. Well, because students
I'm just doing the math.
They start and it takes
I get
them.
It.
It's because of finances, and then they drop out.
I understand.
And I was actually quite surprised to hear that. But I was wondering, Justin, if you could talk a little bit about the strategies that you're looking to help students finish in 4 years. And certainly the tuition guarantee is a financial one. But what else can you do to help students? And of course, if they drop out, then they're carrying student loans and paying debt on a degree that they didn't finish.
Right, absolutely. I think we have an moral imperative to do everything we can do to help a student achieve what they came to achieve. Because to your point, the worst outcome is leaving with debt and no degree. It's like you go to a car dealership, you sign the contract, but you don't actually get a car. What was the point of that? So we look at this both from there's the academic piece, right? So we look at which of the early year courses, the ones that are like, the onboarding courses when they're new and learning college, which are the courses that have the biggest failure rates. We call the DFWs, DF and withdrawal. And we see how can we put as much instruction, academic support as we can to help students succeed in those courses. But a lot of it is outside of the academic realm. So trying to help students, find their way on campus. What are the co-curricular activities that get them excited? I don't have the number off the top of my head, but there's a huge difference between the graduation rate of students who have outside of classroom contact with faculty and engaged staff compared to those that don't. So how do we, we do these things called RATs, right, where we are living learning communities, where we get students together in the dorms who are similar in their degree interests, and we bring programming to them. So we need to do find students where they are and meet them where they are and help them, do more than just simply see themselves as going to class. So that's a big piece. Another big piece is looking at where students are financially. And so making sure that students, even if they still owe the university a little bit of money, can still register on time, right? Register with everybody else. Get the classes that they need, right? Don't make any short-term financial issues an obstacle to getting into the courses they need, because then, otherwise they're missing that window in terms of a required course, and that a semester can cost you a year. So we're trying to figure out all the things, like what are the obstacles and speed bumps that we've inadvertently put in place, and how do we get rid of those?
There's a whole host of issues. As you mentioned, we only have a minute or so left. And when everyone found out we were speaking to you, everybody was saying, you got to ask him about Deion Sanders, AKA Coach Prime. What is it like being his boss?
So I will say, decades ago when I decided to go get a PhD at MIT in engineering, being Deion's boss was the first thing on my mind.
I love it.
So here's the thing about Deion. One, it means that at no point in time will I ever be the most recognizable person on campus. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It also means that I have a visible partner on campus who talks to students bluntly about having a successful life, right? That he talks to his players not just about succeeding in football, but that most of them won't go to the NFL. And he works with them for their career trajectories across all disciplines. I have a partner who has in the past gone publicly and talked about his own mental health challenges, right? And mental health challenges are one of those things that keep graduation rate down, right? So normalizing the ability to talk about those challenges is tremendous. I have a partner who is willing to stand up after every win and tell his team, celebrate, but no means no. And he'll say it over and over again, no means no, until they say it back, and does not tolerate, any form of the kind of behaviors that some institutions have seen through athletics. So I've got a partner in driving all the right messages that we want our campus to hear across all of our students, who also talks about the importance of excellence, right?
Yeah.
We know that as a campus, we can't do everything, but everything we do, we want to do at that highest level.
Hey,
so it's fantastic having Deion on campus, and I'm glad he's going to be here for a while.
Justin, one last quick question. Just got about 30, 40 seconds here. We're Bloomberg. We think about financial aspects of everything, including sports and collegiate sports. There's a lot going on. What does it mean to have him there when it comes to school finances and fundraisers and sports programs and name, image, likeness? Just quickly.
So his impact on our campus and our community is huge, right? We went from not having many people in the stadium to selling out. The estimate is that the 6 home games we had in 2024 brought about $146 million to the city of Boulder and the surrounding region. That's enormous. I don't know this is, I'm speculating when I say this, but demonstrating that we can be a city that supports events that have Deion Sanders may have influenced the question, are we a city that can support having the Sundance Film Festival, right?
Interesting.
It's that visibility of as a community that's huge. We've also seen, increases in our national ability to recruit students into all majors. He's having so many different levels of impact. It's just been fantastic. We were the only team in the country last season to be on every one of the national networks and the flagship ESPN station, which is a school first. But think about some of the names in college football, but we were the only one.
Fascinating. Good stuff. Really enjoyed talking with you, and I hope you'll come back soon. Dr. Justin Schwartz, Chancellor at the University of Colorado, Boulder, joining us from Boulder, Colorado. He's also founder and CEO of Lupine Materials and Technology. Great to cover a lot of ground with him.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
I'm driving in my car.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. This is not a toy.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the drive to the close
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, TikTok, everybody. Just about 18 minutes to go until we wrap up the trade on this Wednesday. Kind of a weird little trade, bouncing around a little bit, but call it flat on the S&P, as you just heard from Charlie. Down about 91 points there on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, if you're keeping watch on that index. And the NASDAQ 100 holding on to just a slight gain, up about 74 points, but definitely, again, all of these averages off their best levels of the session. We've seen tech outperform today, but it does feel like a little bit of a breather on this Wednesday.
I want to get on over to Aaron Cannon. He's CEO at Clear Harbor Asset Management. He joins us from Stamford, Connecticut right now. Clear Harbor's got about $2 billion in assets under management. Okay, we're going to talk about the markets in just a second, Aaron, but I was in your neck of the woods over the weekend and on Monday and last week as well, and it was just a constant parking lot on 95. Is it always like that in Stamford?
It's challenging. There's a bottleneck. There's some construction right now, so it's worse than usual. But this is a rather challenging corridor for sure.
Yeah, my parents drove to LaGuardia this morning, Carol, from Fairfield, 2.5 hours to get to LaGuardia.
I can imagine. It gets messy, right, Aaron? Like, it's just kind of rough.
Yeah, well, it's maybe some more infrastructure spending in the years ahead will help.
I was thinking about infrastructure a lot when I was going back and forth over the weekend. Hey,
the Boring Company in Elon doesn't sound so crazy, right? You would take some little tunnels where you could just kind of do a straight shot. Just saying.
All I'm going to say is I did a trip to Norway 7 years ago or something.
And?
You don't need the Boring Company to make amazing tunnels. They've had the tunnels that they have through the mountains. Oh, it's amazing. Yeah.
Pretty cool.
No comparison to what happens here in the U.S. Okay, we're going to get to everything that's on our radar when it comes to the kind of blistering rally that we've seen from those April lows. Eric Weiner was on with us earlier. He called the reprieve between the U.S. and China a postponement of the trade war. Would you agree?
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, I think that there's good reason to believe that President Trump is poised to take out a little more of a scalpel as it pertains to what's going on with China negotiations. And what I mean by that is that there is a real national security concern with regard to some aspects of our trade arrangements. We have rare earths, 90% plus of which are being refined in China. We have 90% of our ibuprofen being manufactured in China. And, we have semiconductors that are being manufactured outside the United States and Taiwan. Yes, Taiwan's an ally, but, China has, discussed the possibility of invading Taiwan. And so I think that there may be a middle road here. I suspect that President Trump will want to maintain tariffs across major economies of 10% or so. And I suspect that China will be probably a recipient of higher tariffs than that, perhaps 15%, with these carve-outs that I mentioned around national security. So certainly much higher than they were just a few weeks ago, and we'll have to see how it all sorts out.
So do you feel like the worst is over for the equity markets, or not so fast, that we are indeed in a bear market, so get ready for some more downside at some point?
I mean, I'm a bit cautious here. We've had a major rally. If you look at the Mag 7, they've rallied from that April 8th sort of low, about 28%. They're still down 5% this year, though. You take the S&P 500, it's rallied about 18% off that April 8th low, and it's actually about flat on the year. And yes, Q1 earnings were somewhat robust, but there was a lot of pull forward, we think. Maybe some deceleration in the back half of the year, but still positive earnings going forward. Multiples are not cheap. They're still in sort of top decile in many cases. But the broader market is more fair value. If you look at like equal weight S&P trading at 16 times, there are lots of opportunities we still think may exist there. But the uncertainty around tariffs hasn't gone away, and for good reason. We still have this all in place.
Right. And as we've been talking and continue to talk with folks like yourself and some of our internals as well as other external guests, I mean, this idea that, the data points that we continue to mull over, report out, don't reflect any of the tariff news. And so, get ready perhaps for all of that to play out as we get into the summer. And you do wonder what kind of implications that might have for valuations or how investors will look at the markets.
I think that's right. I think that's why time is of the essence. I think that's why corporate America has put so much pressure on the White House to, if they're going to backpedal, if they're going to take out a scalpel instead of a mallet on the tariff issue, become a little more detailed and refined around it, do it sooner rather than later. Let's not create unnecessary harm to the economy. I think there's an understanding that's been sort of permeating up into the Oval Office around that. And so I'm somewhat hopeful that we're going to continue to move. We're still going to make, some progress in a positive way. We've done it with the UK. It looks like we may be in the process of doing it with China. The EU's next, multi-country. It's going to be more challenging. But I think that this is considered progress. And if you read The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump, he's sort of all about shock and awe and creating a level of confusion. Even as Secretary Bessent said this as much within the last week, that this is sort of his approach.
Yeah.
We'll have to see how this all plays out.
All right. So, Aaron, I have to ask you, have you read The Art of the Deal? Did you read it years ago? Or I do wonder if everybody's like pulling that book out again and saying, we got to take a look at it.
Yeah, I'm sort of pulling it out now, to be honest, for the first time. And the parallels are sort of striking. And so, that's why I bring this to your attention.
Love it. What else should we know about from The Art of the Deal?
You got to dust off your copy, Carol.
I know.
Yeah. Well, I don't have much more for you on that, but certainly the president's trying to nudge monetary policy officials to cut rates, and he's doing that quite overtly. But what's interesting to see there is that the Fed is sort of facing a dilemma of not knowing whether or not these tariffs stay, whether or not growth becomes a challenge if tariffs stay, or whether or not pricing and inflation becomes more of a challenge. But if you look at the front end of the bond market, Carol and Tim, with twos trading right around 2%, 50 basis points below the Fed funds rate, one could argue that the market's still pricing in some cuts this year, just not as many as they were just a week ago or just a few days ago, and perhaps starting to cut later this year rather than mid this year. So that's sort of a thought that, Trump's nudging or maybe not so nudging, verbally berating the Fed chair may not result in much activity for several months.
Hey, Aaron, before we let you go, just 30 seconds on gold. For much of the year, it's been new all-time high after new all-time high, down about 7.4% from those highs earlier this month. What say you about gold right now?
Yeah, we're still constructive over the long run as it pertains to gold. We think that gold is an alternative currency. It can't be manipulated by the money printing process of a fiat currency like the dollar, like the euro, like the yen, and that it does have a place in portfolios. We also think the added catalyst for owning gold is the reality, which is after Russia invaded Ukraine a couple of years ago, we shut off dollar access to Russia. Maybe that was for good reason, but I think a lot of countries that are not so friendly with the United States, when they think about creating a reserve currency for trade purposes, owning gold over dollar makes a bit more sense to them on the margin.
All right. Always appreciate your view on the markets. Aaron Cannon, co-founder, and CEO at Clear Harbor Asset Management. This is Bloomberg.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.